ở đây.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm bringing you a brand new story, a deeply emotional one about a single mother named Gwyn. From a very young age, Gwyn had to endure the pain of losing her parents. She was taken in and raised like a daughter by her kind-hearted grandmother. But fate was never kind to her. Her grandmother fell gravely ill and had to sell everything in the house for medical treatment. And when her grandmother passed away, Gwyn suddenly lost everything. No home, no family, and not even a place to call her own. With no other choice, the little orphan began wandering from place to place, trying to survive. But life grew even crueler. In a tragic turn of events, she was assaulted by a vile man and became pregnant. Though filled with pain and humiliation, Gwyn chose to keep the baby, because that child was her only bloodline, the only reason for her to keep going in this harsh world. The day Gwyn gave birth marked the beginning of a truly arduous journey. Alone, with no money and no one to help her, Gwyn did everything she could to raise her child. The two of them clung to each other to survive, collecting scrap metal and plastic bottles, foraging for bamboo shoots in the forest to sell at the market. Whether under the scorching sun or pouring rain, Gwyn never stopped fighting, just to earn enough to buy milk for her baby. But days of poor nutrition left Gwyn's frail body exhausted. She could no longer produce milk for her child. Holding her crying baby in her arms, her heart ached. Yet instead of giving up, she gritted her teeth and pushed forward, taking any job she could find, determined to keep her child from going hungry. And this was only the beginning. Stay tuned for today's video and witness the extraordinary journey of Gwyn, a single mother whose story will surely move your heart. Meanwhile, on another trail deep within the forest, Sun, a seasoned forest ranger, was making his rounds. Today, he was especially vigilant. In recent weeks, illegal loggers had grown bolder, mercilessly cutting down valuable trees and leaving behind bare stumps, like open wounds scarring the heart of nature. Sun's hand tightened around the gun at his hip, his sharp eyes scanning every treetop and every fresh saw mark on the trunks. He gritted his teeth. "You've got guts, but if I catch you, you won't get away." As he examined the freshly cut stump of a massive tree, a strange sound pierced the whispering wind. He froze. It was a baby crying. Sun frowned. In this remote forest, dozens of kilometers away from the nearest village, how could there be a baby? He stood still for a moment, then immediately followed the sound. The crying grew clearer, frail yet desperate, like a plea for help. He pushed aside a tangle of bushes and stopped dead in his tracks. Before him was a sight that made his chest tighten. A frail woman, her clothes torn and dirty, lay unconscious on the forest path. In her arms was a baby, no more than a few months old, wailing and clutching her shirt with its tiny hands, shaking her as if begging her to wake up. Sun knelt down quickly. "Hey! Can you hear me?" No response. He leaned closer and checked her breathing. It was so faint it was almost gone. The baby's cries were hoarse, its little face flushed red from hunger and fear. In that moment, Sun didn't think twice. He set his gun aside, gently lifted the baby and whispered, "Easy now. I'm here, your mother will be okay." His gaze shifted to Gwyn's face, hollow and worn down by hardship. His jaw tightened. He couldn't call for backup, the radio signal here was too weak. And he knew, if he waited, it might already be too late. Without a second of hesitation, Sun bent down, hoisted Gwyn onto his shoulder, and held the baby close in his other arm. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his eyes were unwavering. "Hang on. I'll get you both out of here." He moved swiftly, his boots crunching on the dry leaves beneath him. The baby whimpered weakly in his arms, but gradually quieted down, as if sensing safety in the strong arms that held it. Then, a loud crack echoed from behind. Sun spun around instantly, his senses sharp. But it was only the wind snapping a dry branch. He exhaled in relief, tightened his hold on the baby, and pressed forward. When they finally reached the safe edge of the forest, Sun carefully set Gwyn down on a flat rock. He pulled out a water bottle from his pack and pressed it gently to her lips. Then, using the first aid skills he had learned, he checked her pulse and tried to bring her back to consciousness. "Miss, can you hear me?" he said softly, tapping her shoulder. Her heavy eyelids quivered, then slowly opened. In her dazed state, she saw the sunburnt face of a stranger, his eyes filled with concern. Where am I?" Gwyn's voice was faint, barely a whisper. "You and your baby, you almost didn't make it. But you're safe now. I'm Sun, a forest ranger. Where's your home? I'll take you both there." At his words, Gwyn's eyes blurred with tears. She bit her lip, her voice trembling. I don't have a home. I don't have anyone left." Sun froze. That single, broken sentence struck him deep. He looked at the frail baby clinging to its mother's chest, then back at Gwyn's pale, exhausted face. In her eyes, he saw a kind of despair no human being should ever have to endure. He said nothing. Instead, he took a deep breath, bent down, and lifted both mother and child into his arms. "All right, if you have no home, then for now, you'll come to mine." On the way back, the baby, drained from hunger, finally fell asleep in Sun's arms. Gwyn, still dizzy and weak, rested her head on his shoulder. Under the blazing sun, the silent man walked on, his step steady, though his heart weighed heavy. When they reached his small wooden cabin by the forest's edge, Sun immediately fetched water for Gwyn, then brought out the little food he had left, warm bowls of porridge and some dried fish, urging her to eat. He also prepared powdered milk from his limited supplies for the baby. Watching her baby drink the milk and finally sleep peacefully in a thin blanket, Gwyn couldn't hold back her tears. "Thank you, if it weren't for you, my baby and I." Sun waved her off, his voice firm but warm. "Don't say anything. Stay here for a few days. Rest. When you and your baby are well again, we'll figure out what to do next." Gwyn's trembling hands clutched his tightly, as though holding onto a lifeline. For the first time in what felt like forever, in the darkness of her life, she no longer felt completely alone. And Sun, standing there watching the mother and child drift into an exhausted sleep, felt something unfamiliar stir within him, something beyond duty, a deep, aching compassion. He murmured softly. She must have suffered so much." Just a few hours after Gwyn and her baby were brought to the house, Sun had already made sure they were fed. The baby, after drinking some milk, was sound asleep, wrapped in the thin blanket Sun had carefully prepared. His small, quiet home now felt strangely warm. But then, a familiar sound came from the door, the rumble of a motorbike, followed by the creak of the wooden lock. Sun froze. He knew exactly who it was, Back, his older brother. Back was the only family Sun had left. The two of them had been orphans since childhood, growing up in poverty. Back had raised him, guided him, and turned him from a frail boy into the strong police officer he was today. But because of his work in a distant unit, Back rarely came home, and whenever he did, it was always after long, exhausting assignments. The door opened. Back stepped in, his boots dusty from the road, his police uniform still on. But the moment he entered, his eyes landed on an unexpected scene. On the old bamboo bed lay a frail young woman with a hollow face, holding a sleeping baby tightly in her arms. Beside her, Son was quietly cleaning up the pot of porridge he had just cooked. "Son, what's going on here?" Back's voice was stern, his brows furrowed. Son looked up, a little flustered. "Brother, let me explain." In a few brief moments, Son recounted everything: the baby's cries in the forest, finding Gwyn unconscious, and his decision to bring her and her child home because he simply couldn't leave them there. Back stood in silence. He glanced at Gwyn, this frail, exhausted woman holding her baby, then turned his gaze back to his brother. Though his expression was cold, there was a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. He sighed. "Her situation is truly pitiful. But Son, we can't keep her and the baby here for long. Just for a few days, brother. They have nowhere else to go. Once they recover, we'll figure out what to do." Son's tone was firm. Back shook his head. "You don't understand. If we let them stay, it'll only bring trouble. We still have our duties, our work. The best thing to do is to give her some money, and let her go." "Brother." Son clenched his fists, his voice sharp. "Can't you see how much they've suffered? Are we really going to throw them out like this?" Back stared at him for a long moment. In his gaze was the strictness of an elder brother, but also something else: hesitation. At last, he turned away, his voice hard. "I just don't want you to get dragged into unnecessary trouble. We can help in other ways, but keeping them here? I can't agree to that." Son fell silent. He turned to look at Gwyn, still asleep, her hollow cheeks resting against the baby she clung to as though it were her only treasure in the world. In that moment, Son felt his chest tighten painfully. Finally, he spoke, quiet but resolute. "If you won't agree, then I'll take full responsibility. I won't abandon them." Back stood by the doorway, his expression torn. After a moment, he approached Gwyn and placed a small bundle of money into her hand. His voice was calm, but firm. "Take this, and leave. It's not that I don't pity you, but Son is my brother. He's lived alone for years, no wife, no family. If you and your child stay here, the neighbors will gossip. That could hurt his reputation, and his career." Gwyn's heart ached at his words. Her hands trembled, and her eyes welled up with tears. Since the day she gave birth, she had never felt so small, so powerless. She understood Back wasn't wrong. She was just a homeless woman with a child. No matter how pitiful her situation, her presence here would inevitably stir unwanted rumors. Her voice cracked as she shook her head. "Thank you, but I can't take this money. I'll go." She lowered her head, picked up her baby, and her thin shoulders trembled. Slowly, she walked toward the gate, her frail figure and the baby in her arms blending into the harsh afternoon sun. But then, Son suddenly ran after her. "Gwyn! Wait!" His voice rang out, filled with urgency. Gwyn turned around, her tear-stained eyes meeting his. He hurried to her side, holding an old cloth hat. Gently, he placed it on her head and spoke softly. "The sun's too strong, wear this." She stood silent, clutching her shirt, unable to speak. But Son didn't stop there. He took her hand and slipped some money into her trembling palm. "Take it. Think of it as a loan. Pay me back later if you can. And, if things get hard, my home is here. You can always come back." Gwyn's lips trembled. Tears streamed down her gaunt face. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt something she thought she had lost: warmth. She bit her lip, holding back her sobs. Her eyes, filled with gratitude and sorrow, lingered on Sun. She lowered her head and whispered, "Thank you, truly, thank you." Sun simply nodded. He said nothing more, only stood there watching as her thin figure, holding her baby, slowly disappeared down the narrow path. Inside the house, Bax stood silently, watching through the doorway. In his eyes, there was a shadow of contemplation, and perhaps, a trace of regret. After leaving Sun's house, Gwyn carried her baby to a small roadside shop. From her old, worn-out basket, she pulled out the lingji mushrooms and bamboo shoots she had painstakingly gathered in the forest. The shop owner, a middle-aged woman, examined them carefully before naming a price. Though it wasn't much, when added to the money Sun had slipped into her hand before she left, it was enough to give her a small sense of relief. With that money, she bought milk for her baby, a few loaves of bread, and some cheap food. Mother and child huddled together in a corner of the sidewalk, eating and holding each other close. Watching her little boy drink his milk eagerly, Gwyn's eyes blurred with tears. How long had it been since she last saw her child eat until he was full? But that brief moment of happiness couldn't chase away a harsher truth. Where would they sleep tonight? As dusk began to fall, Gwyn carried her baby through the narrow streets. The night wind was bitterly cold, and her baby buried his head against her shoulder, his tiny eyes closing in exhaustion. After walking for what felt like hours, she came across a small makeshift hut in a field, a simple shelter for storing tools, with no door and no one around. Gwyn stood there for a long moment. Looking at her son sleeping on her shoulder, she bit her lip hard, then stepped inside. Inside the hut, there was only an old, tattered hammock. She spread a few scraps of fabric on the ground, laid her baby down, and held him tightly in her arms. The place was damp, and the cold wind seeped through every gap, but at least it was shelter from the night dew. She whispered softly, "Sleep, my love, tomorrow, Mama will find a way." That night, Gwyn couldn't sleep. She lay wide-eyed, staring at the leaking roof, listening to the wind howl and the insects cry outside. Fear gripped her chest until it hurt. But looking at her baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, she swallowed her tears and bit her lip until it bled, forcing herself to endure. The next morning, just as Gwyn stepped outside with her baby to get some air, a woman appeared. She was in her 50s, plump, with a sharp face and eyes that glinted with cold practicality. "Who told you you could stay here?" the woman barked, arms folded across her chest. "This is my land. Get out." Gwyn quickly bowed her head, her voice trembling. "Please. I beg you. Just let us stay for a few days. I have a baby. I'll find work and pay you, I swear." The woman smirked coldly, her voice dripping with disdain. "Stay. There's no such thing here. No money, no shelter. This isn't a charity." Gwyn fell to her knees, pleading, "Please, have pity on us. Just a few days." But the woman didn't budge. Without the slightest hint of mercy, she stepped inside and tossed out everything Gwyn owned, her few old clothes, the thin blanket she'd treasured, all thrown onto the dirt. "Get out. One more word and I'll have you dragged out," the woman snapped, her voice sharp as a blade. Gwyn clutched her baby, tears streaming down her face, but not a single word came out. Her baby, terrified, wailed loudly, clutching her neck as if for dear life. The woman only stood there, arms crossed, watching them with cold indifference. Quietly, Gwyn knelt down and gathered her scattered belongings, her hands trembling. On the dusty red road, under the blazing sun, she carried her baby and her few meager possessions and walked away without looking back. The baby in her arms cried on and on, his weak, hoarse sobs cutting through the sweltering midday heat like a lament against a merciless fate. Each cry pierced deeper into Gwyn's heart. She tried to soothe him, but she herself didn't know what to do. Her eyes were red and swollen, heavy with grief, but not a single tear fell, perhaps because she had long since cried them all out. With her baby in one arm and her few belongings in the other, she walked along the sun-scorched dirt road. The heat was brutal, but it was nothing compared to the burning ache in her heart. The baby buried his face into her shoulder, sobbing in exhaustion, his tiny hands clutching at her clothes as if afraid the world might abandon him. And Gwyn, each step she took only seemed heavier than the last. She passed endless coffee fields and empty roads, her gaze fixed on the ground, as though she no longer dared to look ahead. In that moment, the world seemed to shrink until it was only her, a frail mother, and her child, struggling against a merciless destiny. The baby's cries mingled with the dry wind of the harsh afternoon sun, creating a mournful melody that told the story of two lost souls with no home and no refuge. Gwyn whispered, her voice trembling. "Baby, just a little longer. Mama will find us a place. I promise." But deep down, even she didn't know if that was a promise she could keep. And then, in that lonely, desolate scene, a shadow appeared in the distance, watching their every weary step. Gwyn and her baby kept walking beneath the scorching midday sun, their small figures slowly fading into the distance beyond the rows of trees. Her frail legs trembled with every step, but she held her child tightly, as if letting go would make everything vanish. The baby's weak cries blended with the dry wind, sounding like a mournful melody echoing across the desolate land. Gwyn's eyes stayed fixed on the ground, but within them was a sky full of darkness. She didn't know where she was going. No home, no family, no one to turn to, only the faint strength within her pushing her forward. And yet, even in such despair, this mother cradled her child and whispered, "I'm okay. I won't ever leave you." Behind them, the endless dirt road stretched far, with clouds of dust rising at every step. It was a scene like a sorrowful painting, two fragile lives wandering in a vast, indifferent world. But somewhere, a pair of watchful eyes remained. A man who once saved them at the brink of death. A man with an unwavering heart, Sun, the quiet forest ranger, as steadfast and silent as the very woods he protects. Where will fate lead Gwyn? Will Sun appear once again to extend a helping hand, or will this remain nothing more than a fleeting encounter, lost in the flow of life? Gwyn's story is still being written, each step she takes hanging between hope and despair. If you want to know what happens next, if you want to witness this tearful journey that still carries a glimmer of hope, follow the channel, lytutien Gwyn, to see the full story. Don't miss the next episode, because perhaps, the most fateful moment is still yet to come.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người. Bữa nay thì kênh mình lên thêm một nội dung mới. Mình hy vọng rằng nội dung sẽ được mọi người yêu quý và ủng hộ hơn. Đây là một nội dung khá là mới trên kênh của mình, kể về một mẹ đơn thân nghèo khó với những khó khăn và đời sống, cũng như là tình yêu với anh chàng cảnh sát bảo vệ rừng. Mình hy vọng rằng mọi người sẽ yêu quý và ủng hộ cho kênh mình nhiều hơn, để mình có động lực để ra những video hay và ý nghĩa hơn, và mong rằng sẽ đón nhận được nhiều tình yêu mến của mọi người. Và nếu mọi người yêu mến kênh mình thì hãy like và share video cũng như thả tim video mọi người nhé. Và mọi người ơi, hãy đăng ký kênh, sau đó bật chuông thông báo lên để không bỏ lỡ bất kỳ video nào. Và nếu như mọi người muốn xem video chính thức thì có thể tìm kênh quynh đó để có thể xem video nha. Tạm biệt mọi người, bye bye.